Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hello and welcome to An Unconventional Life. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Strickland, the founder and CEO of Dissertation Done. And I'm here today with Dr. Suzana Flores, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in pop culture, mythology, and social media addiction. She's a keynote speaker and author of Untamed, the Psychology of Marvel's Wolverine. And we've had a little bit of a talk already about this. I am so excited to share this with you guys. This is so cool. She currently works as a trauma specialist with Osher Healthcare System in New Orleans. And it is a, she's a commentator, a psychological expert. She's appeared on numerous national and international newscasts, podcasts, radio, and talk shows, including such things as the Howard Stern Network, PBS, Al Jazeera, WCIU, the channel, the U, at in Chicago, if I remember correctly. Let's see, there's also NPR, Sirius XM, WGN Radio Chicago, the ManCow Show, which I remember listening to when I was in Chicago. Just a host of media appearances, been quoted in the the Chicago Tribune, the Huffington Post, ABC, CBS, Esquire, on and on and on. Cannot wait for you guys to meet Dr. Flores. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Now, I'll let folks know just very briefly that today's episode is being brought to you by Dissertation Done. And at Dissertation Done, we help adult doctoral students through the dissertation process. If that's something that you're facing or will be facing soon, why don't you reach out to us and let's have a conversation at dissertationdone.com/done. See if we might be a good fit to help you fast track your dissertation, get to graduation a lot sooner than you thought possible. And if you have graduated and your first name is Doctor and you would like to publish a book in that expert space, then reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book. No better way of becoming an instant expert than not only having the first name Doctor, but literally writing the book on your area of expertise. So we'll be happy to talk with you about that if you like. That's the commercial. Now, Dr. Flores, welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wolverine. This is so cool. We talked about this a little bit before we started the show here today. Tell folks, how did you end up in the comic book world as a person with a doctoral degree in psychology?
It was completely unexpected to me. I would have never in a million years would have thought that I would be involved in the comic book world. I never read them as a child or a teenager. I just started up until a few years ago. And so my background is in, you mentioned like trauma and pain psychology. And a few years ago, I'm pretty open about this topic because I think it's an important topic to share. But a few years ago, I was sexually assaulted. And, a lot of people think that psychologists are immune to trauma, and it's absolutely not true. We go through what everybody else goes through, a lot of emotional numbing and depression and anxiety, confusion, etc. And so the legal process was also, it was almost more traumatizing than the event itself. I was just going through a lot, like defamation of character, people blaming the victim, everything that, a trauma victim goes through. And somewhere in there, I remember passing by this comic book store, and I saw a picture of, it was a panel of Wolverine, and he was in the gutter, covered in dung, and, just beaten in battle. And then all of a sudden he had the claws out, schnicked, right, as the comic books say, and he said, something along the lines of, "Okay, suckers, now it's my turn." And then he went medieval, on his enemies, sliced and diced and whatever. And something about that panel really called to me. And I remember thinking I want that type of strength. That's who I want to be. And I had have a friend, his name is Al Padilla, who's a huge Wolverine fan, and he was one of the first people that mentioned, I think that you should write about him because your stories are very similar. I have chronic pain. Wolverine has pain, and you suffer trauma. And so I'm like, and I just kind of started looking into it, and I became addicted. And luckily, I have a lot of geek friends, right, that kind of helped me along the way. It's like over 40 years of Wolverine stories, and I became obsessed and just immersed. And so the more that I read about Wolverine, I realized, and the X-Men for that matter, I realized that comic books are a form of modern mythology that represent the human experience, from anywhere from like good versus evil, submission versus domination, control, and suppression and oppression. And I just realized at one point I can write this. And someone had already written, like a story about Batman. And so I figured I'd write like Wolverine. It's never been done, the psychology of Wolverine. And in order to write it, I just had to imagine that he was an actual client of mine, of which would never happen, right? But he's like surly and angry, and he would never be in a psychologist's couch, never in a million years. But I had to kind of imagine that. And so like I knew nothing of the comic book world. So I started attending Comic Cons, and luckily I met someone called Chandler Rice of Celestial Comics, Desert Wind Comics, and he knew a lot of people, and he heard my story, and he started connecting me with writers and artists of Wolverine, including the creators of Wolverine. So like Roy Thomas, Len Wein, John Romita Sr. I didn't get to meet Herb Trimpe because he's deceased. So it was very much an honor. And as I was speaking to these writers and artists, I think it was John Romita Jr. that asked, like, so why Wolverine? You could write about anybody. And I said, like, well, someone already wrote about Batman, so I picked like the most popular character of Marvel. And he's like, that's wonderful. Now, why did you really write about Wolverine? And I'm like, wow, right? Like unshrink, like trying to, shrinking the shrink. And so then I shared my story, and he shared a story of, his experience with anger and rage, and wanting to protect. And he is a true blue New Yorker, and remember experiencing extreme rage during 9/11, and that he's never felt before. But he's also a martial artist, and he had to find balance with that. Consequently, Wolverine is also a martial artist, in the comic book world. And so this is a character that is really messed up psychologically. He experiences trauma after trauma. He experiences something called dissociative amnesia, where his mind tries to protect him from all of the trauma, and his body heals over and over. But because that happens, he's never really able to fully process, to work through the trauma. And yet he strives every day to become a better human being, which I think is, once again, the human experience. And it's been an amazing journey since. So, I after the interviews, I wrote a lot, interviewed, other people like, experts in the X-Men, who are pretty much like a mythological form representing the societal oppression of minorities. I've also learned that as well. It just took so many different angles, like what does an enemy mean, like Wolverine's enemies, the love triangle with Jean Grey, and Scott, and what does that mean in the psychological world. And I just got so much material out of it. From there, I was invited to do a TED Talk from TEDx from Grand Canyon University, and that talk is called Untamed, what Wolverine teaches us about rage. And so it's in defense of anger, like anger serves us, like we try to suppress it, but it actually serves us, like when something, because in life, some things are not okay, and it's a call to action to do something about it, which is exactly what I went through. Like I had to feel intense anger in order to get my fight back, because I was very depressed, very, anxious. And at one point I just exploded, right? I, so to speak, lost it. And at that, I realized I was going to fight back. Even if I was going to lose, I was going to fight back, because no one was going to silence my voice. I was going to be like Wolverine. And so he is my superhero, so to speak. And he's damaged, and he's not perfect.
Right.
So like Superman would not serve me. He was too perfect, right? Wolverine would, he has his own moral code. And at the time, because I was so angry, I think I just needed someone who was damaged and traumatized and saw red like I did at the time. And just, took day by day to try to solve like his confusion and, I don't know, just trying to like go day by life, and while trying to become a better person and still being very authentic to who he was. And that was me. And it changed my life. And Comic-Cons are a whole other conversation. I've had people come up to me, like I've done some panels, and I've signed books at Comic-Cons, and people find me and, they'll share their stories with me of sexual assault or any kind of assault. And, we hug, we cry, and it's a connection that I've never known before. So that's my story.
And just so amazing that you were able to take this psychological state of damage that as you refer to it, and be able to turn it into something that was powerful for you and has helped other people in the community. That's one of the things I love talking to doctoral students and people who have their doctoral degrees about, is there always seems to be this undercurrent of helping, of serving others in some way. And I think it's just brilliant that your doctoral experience prepared you for this, because we were talking about there being a bit of a connection going all the way back to then, right?
Yes, someone recently pointed out, so he was asking me, like, what was my dissertation title? And I said mine was an analysis of the character Raskolnikov from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, based on Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. And so he mentioned, it seems like you've been analyzing characters for a while. And the thought never occurred to me, but he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so I think it was, as you mentioned, like the precursor to something grander, further on.
And that's one of the things I'd like to really bring out to people, is that going through this process of earning a doctoral degree prepares you for so many things that you would not anticipate. Mm-hmm. It prepares you to handle things in life in a different way than you might have done it otherwise, but it also prepares you and opens up opportunities to you that just wouldn't be there otherwise.
Very, very true. As part of my background, I was planning, the original plan, right, was to be a forensic psychologist.
Yep.
And then I ended up at the VA Medical Center in Salisbury, North Carolina, where I got training in trauma. And that took over whatever forensics interest that I had, and then became trained in pain psychology, and then ended up in the comic book world. And so I said, like, I often tell my students or like my former students, interns, et cetera, you don't want to get married to a particular, area or a particular, subject. Like, you think this is what I want to do, but sometimes in life you just have to allow certain experiences to guide you, certain interests, and we listen to the mind and the body connection. And many times, like, the mind ignores the body, and we shouldn't, right? When something excites us, right, we feel like, great, that's usually where we should grow and go. Sorry, I meant go. And however, when there's that tightness in our chest and we feel like a lot of apprehension, that might be a signal that this may or may not, be for you, but it's a notion of at least analyzing it. And so that's pretty much what happened to me. And so, like, I would thought forensics, and then after a while, I'm like, I wasn't feeling that excited about it after a while. Trauma was great, pain psychology was great, and then writing was the exhilaration of all exhilarations. And I didn't even know how to write. I had to learn how to write a nonfiction book. It's very sad. I went to a book. I went to a bookstore.
Your doctoral degree work, right?
Well, yes, I knew how to write, but it's a different form of writing.
Right. That's what I'm saying. They teach you how not to write in your dissertation, because nobody reads those things, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so now you have to write something people will actually want to read.
Yes, and I think that was like, I got a lot of help with this, and I heard several times, this is not a research paper. You have to turn that off, because this is not what this is. It's an analysis of a character, and you have to make it readable for the general public. And so I'm like, okay. And so I actually went to a bookstore and I bought a book this is hilarious. I bought a book on how to write a nonfiction book. So I'm like, I'm buying a book on how to write a nonfiction book.
Yeah.
And so I learned a little bit at a time, and my writing developed over time. And it just took me to a very surprising place that I would have never imagined.
Well, I'm a big fan of planning and then adjusting as you go, because you never know what experiences are going to mold you and change you and open up new vistas that you hadn't noticed before. So I think that it's great
Exactly.
to have some sense of direction. That way, at least you should always have some sense of direction, because you don't want to just be aimless, but you should be willing to change the direction when called to do so. That's the way I like to do things, at least, because I certainly did not plan at any point in my past to be doing this what I'm doing right now.
I bet.
This is just,
and yet here you are.
That kind of, it just kind of happened because I did this and that and the other, and it makes sense in hindsight, but it's not where I would have seen things going ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I was honored enough to have the opportunity to speak at Stanley's memorial.
Oh, wow.
And that was the honor and opportunity of a lifetime. And I would have never imagined that I would be not only in that world, but to have that level of an honor. That was unforgettable. I'm eternally grateful for that. And so I enjoy my journey, and my books tend to be related to what I'm going through or experiencing at the moment. So I did write a prior book called Face Hooked, and it is on the psychological effect of social media.
Right.
And I wrote that because I started seeing a different clinical presentation with my patients, and namely social media. And I started speaking to colleagues and my friends about, like, well, this is going to be the next big wave of psychology. And it was very early at the time, and they're like, no. And I'm like, no, this is going to be a thing. Just wait. And so my friends got tired of me speaking about it. And then they said, like, yeah, just write. And so that's where that started as well. Funny story on how that began. Like, I had a downtown office in Chicago, and it was freezing cold. And I'm like, how do I get people to talk to me about this? Because I needed to interview people. And so I held up, it's ridiculous. I held up a poster that said, talk to me about social media. And I'm freezing outside, like with my little mittens and everything, right? And people became very curious. Right. And then so one by one, they slowly started to come towards me, and they're like, what do you want to know? Yeah. And I said, I want to know what your experience is. And people love to talk about their personal experiences. And so because I left it kind of vague like that, like just you can start wherever you want, they really did open up. Like, most people really want to be listened to. Basic psychology. And then after that, I got more in person, like, in my office interviews. And then I opened the interviews to the Facebook audience itself. So I had contributors from all over the world, because obviously, unknowingly, I was tapping into something, and it's affected people in so many different ways that people were beginning to enjoy having a dialogue about their own experiences. And of course, with recent events, it's not just Facebook, it's Twitter. That's a whole other conversation, right? But it obviously has an incredible impact, not only on our individual functioning, but also societal functioning as well.
Yeah, it's been a huge wave, obviously, that's taken over, particularly with, in the recent last several months with the pandemic. So many people not being able to associate with friends and family face to face, but even before then, just the vast changes that we've had in how we deal with people socially. Were there anything that you found that was really unique, or an aha moment that came out of those interviews about social media and how people use Facebook and other tools of this?
Yes. I think there were two things. One, speaking to teenagers who are masters, right, at social media. And I did say, like, okay, I'm old school. Obviously, I'm aging myself, right? We used to use the telephone and obviously texting, but newer generations definitely don't use the telephone nearly as much as my generation. And I said, what is it about that is weird to you? And so in most cases, like they would say it's the pauses that made them uncomfortable, the pauses in conversation. And I said, explain that to me. And they said, well, right now you paused. And I was like, yes, right. And they said, I don't know what to do with that. And I'm like, so I'm like, please go further. They said, well, when you're texting somebody and someone disappears for like a minute or an hour, it's assumed that they got busy, they had to charge their phone or whatever the case may be. But when there is a pause in conversation, it's awkward. And so I told them that's going to be a real problem. And so they're curious, like, why would that be a problem? And I said, because if you don't take pauses in dialogue, in conversations, in terms of understanding yourself and other people, then you are you're avoiding or prohibiting yourself from the opportunity towards introspection, taking the time to think about what this conversation meant to you. So nowadays there's this incredible pressure to respond immediately. Right. To, so the phone is like the extension of the arm, right? If you go to a restaurant and you're with your friends, everybody has their phone on the table, and so like you could do the experiment, right? Like next time you go to a group dinner, you'll see how many people have their phones, because we feel protected. We feel like that's what we need to do. That's who we are nowadays. And so we are actually becoming lonelier. The more connected we become, the actual lonelier.
Isolated.
We are isolated, and there's COVID, right? But I think what COVID and quarantine has taught us, we're not designed to be this isolated, especially for this amount of time. We are social creatures. Right. And, as many emojis that you express, or text or something, it is not the same as human to human interaction. Yeah. And so, it was just wowing to me that the newer generation, they just didn't quite understand the beauty of it's almost like a symphony with conversation, right? One person bounces, an idea off another person, and then the other person counters. And then before you know it, you're talking about something completely different. It has conversations have waves, and they're being deprived that. They don't know what that means. Yeah, and they also don't know what privacy means, not the way we do.
No, that's right. I remember when I was in high school and certainly in college, staying up all night with friends. And at some point, inevitably, we stopped and how the hell did we get here?
Exactly.
Rewind the thing. And yeah, that's just.
And it didn't really matter, right? Because the conversation was flowing in a particular pattern. Right. And so that definitely really concerned me. And so when I was mentioning this to teenagers, they, the newer generations, they're looking at me with deer in the headlights look, right? Of what do you mean? Or in terms of privacy, there is no privacy, not like we knew it, right? And nowadays, taking screenshots of conversations and sharing it with other people, that is normal. Yeah. It's absolutely normal. It's kind of understood. If you're texting it, it is open game, right? It can go absolutely anywhere. And it's you can't really get angry because you texted it, and yet there's this incredible discomfort with speaking to people or hearing their voice. Yeah. And there was this notion of the pauses, silence. They don't know how to interpret or analyze or develop a comfort level with it.
Well, I remember my talking with my kids recently. They seem to think that it was very rude to call someone without sort of an invitation, without kind of announcing it. Probably you and I would think if someone just showed up at your door, knocked on your door, and you had no idea they were coming over. Back in my day, that would be considered rude. A little awkward, a little bit rude. I mean, not straight up, but and it depends on the relationship. But yeah, if it wasn't a very, very, very close relationship, you don't just show up at someone's house. Well, apparently my kids now feel the same way about calling someone on the phone, which I thought was really interesting, the change that's happened in that period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I discovered too is that there is a lot of narcissistic gaslighting that occurs on social media, which has, and it's not just that, there's many other problems, but psychologists have seen record number anxiety cases or, depression cases or even paranoia cases related to social media because we're trying to interpret, sorry, again, talk right now, what a statement or some, whatever someone posts. And it may or may not have anything to do with you, but you're already like making a lot of assumptions, which we already do, in the real world, non-digital world. But interacting on Facebook or any other social media platform has definitely amplified the anxiety. It's also led to a lot of cyber wars. It's a lot easier to argue or to be incredibly mean to people because the screen, even if it's a phone screen, the screen has metaphorically become like a shield, right? If I don't have to see your reaction, then I can say whatever I want. And the keyboard has metaphorically become a bridge between our every thought and the world. And so we just blurt out a lot of things without even thinking of the ramifications. And people have either hurt themselves or hurt other people as a consequence. So it's I'm going to go back to superheroes, right? As Spider-Man says, with power comes responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in social media, and there's many positive aspects too. It's given us a voice, especially the younger generation, right? A voice like we've never had before. We could connect with people across the world in a matter of seconds. It's amazing, but we also have to be careful with it. Think, introspection, take a little bit of time to think about our words and how we might be affecting others. But that's becoming more and more a problem in recent years.
So this has got me thinking now about, cancel culture that's so prevalent these days. And I'm wondering if that topic came up as you were researching Facebook, because to me it seems like it's a product of a younger generation that hasn't realized how easy it is to screw up quite yet, along with that sort of shield of being able to say anything. Oh, I disapprove of that. I'm going to wag a finger at you digitally that I wouldn't necessarily do in public. Did that come up at all in your conversations for Facebook?
Well, it was several years back that Facebook was published. So the cancel culture, that's a little bit more recent. But I think what was more prevalent was this notion of not realizing the magnitude of words.
Yeah.
That's what I think was more prevalent at the time. It was several years that that Facebook was published through Reputation Books, but I'm going to say whatever I want to say, and without realizing not only the ramifications to other people, but also oneself. Additionally, dating, that's a whole other conversation too. Dating or meeting people on social media, and it's just way too easy to be manipulated.
Right.
On social media, because it's a sandbox, right? We throw sand in there and we're creating a persona of who we want to be, right? We posted pictures of the New Year's Eve party. We don't post pictures of the hangover the following day, and so what was very interesting to me was the notion that people were becoming depressed, not only based on what other people were posting, but even comparing themselves to what they posted online. So for example, I've been on social media for a while, like everybody else, right? So, if I'm posting something from 10 years ago when I looked better and thinner and, whatever the case may be, I am taking an emotional hit to myself. And so because on some level we're believing that what we're seeing on social media is real. It's not. That's why all of us get stunned when we hear of a divorce. But for example, and we're like, they look so happy, right? And it's because it's a persona. And yes, we do that in real life too, but everything is amplified online. Everything.
Yeah, much easier to curate when you're
on
social media.
You can create whatever kind of world that you believe is acceptable. We're also editing ourselves like we've never done before. And even people that don't think that they do, yes, you do. Because you're typing something and then you go delete, 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 because you want to type something, or text, whatever, right? Post something that you believe will get you more approval. And so therefore your identity is based on other people's approval. And yes, that's true offline as well. But you're hoping to get the approval of your 2,000 friends that you don't even know. Right. So you're giving away so much power to other people.
Yeah, that's a macro concept that just hit me, that is what drives all of this social media stuff, is kind of a need for approval. And a lot of our greatest artists and thinkers and leaders have never wanted that type of approval. And if we're in this current environment where that's the way that people communicate, what's going to happen to our leaders going forward? And I'm not just talking about political leaders, I mean of any ilk. How are they going to emerge, and are they going to be the same, or are they going to be dramatically and qualitatively changed?
Here's a story that relates to this exact topic. I found an old PowerPoint for the presentations. I became a public speaker on social media, the psychology of social media. And it was like, I believe it was 2013, 2014, somewhere right there.
Yeah.
And I saw a slide that I wrote, like, what would happen if world leaders started using Twitter the way we do? And then I remember saying in this speech, like, this will never happen. Right? This will never happen, or it's not likely to happen, but it would be catastrophic, right? Because, like, again, there's so much, responsibility. And so, like, when I saw this, like, I was reviewing it, I remember just like going like this, like seeing it, and I'm like, I have never been so wrong, because at the time I just couldn't believe, again, I'm not going to go there, but like, the highest levels, right, of politics, right, or someone in a political position would convey messages in a few characters, and the danger of that, and this is what's happening. Whatever side you're on, it doesn't matter, right? Like we're receiving multiple messages from multiple sources throughout multiple times during the day. We're not designed to handle all of that. Right. So what ends up happening is people put the blinders on. I'm only going to see my side, and I don't have time to read this article. I'm just going to judge whatever I see based on a very limited amount of characters. And that's where we're at. And that's dangerous. Yeah. And that, I think, has led to a lot of the problems that we've had in recent years.
And I think that it goes back even a little bit further than that, to things like Facebook saying, hey, we want to give you an experience that you want. And so when you first think about, hey, you get to see advertisements that are things you might actually be interested in, that sounds like a good idea. I don't really need to see a lot of advertisements about menstrual products. I mean, I've got 2 daughters. I've helped them a little bit in that regard, but I think I know everything I need to know about that. So if I don't ever see one of those ads, I'm fine.
But they get so much information from us. Like, even like if your mouse is hovering over the color blue, let's say you see shirts, right? All of a sudden, this has happened to all of us. You'll begin to see products with the color blue or shirts with the color blue. And you're like, that's weird. I just happen to be looking at this thing, and all of a sudden it's on my feed. Of course, because they've just gotten information from it.
But it goes so much further than that. It goes past the advertisements now, because now the only thing that you have to hear anymore on social media is stuff that you agree with. And I think that is such a dangerous thing. That's what's caused this tribalization, where we can literally live in neighborhoods or subdivisions or whatever you want to call it, next to people that are very, very different than we are. And that didn't used to happen. It used to be that there would be small little enclaves of people that were, felt this way, and people that felt that way. Working class people would share a certain ethos, but now it's very, very tribalized, and it's down to the computer you're logging on from. And you can become so different and not hear any news that someone right next door to you is hearing, because you guys have different belief structures or different things you're interested in.
And that comes back to the point of, we're not speaking to each other. We're not having in-person conversations. So, like, let's say a few years back in the 70s or 80s, like, you have, like, if you're a Democrat, you have a Republican friend, or if you're a Republican, you have a Democrat friend, and you're having a debate, and you're like, and you could tell the other person, like, oh, you're an idiot, let's go have a beer. Like, either way, we're going to be friends, right? And we disagree, and that was it. But I certainly believe that social media has led to the polarization of America, and many other problems as well, because once again, we're not designed to handle that much input at one time. And so people cope with it the way that they can. And so they don't have time to listen to other perspectives, or they don't have the mental capacity to, handle that much information. And that's understandable probably for both sides. And so like, it's just like, I'm going to just listen to this, or I'm just going to read this because I can't handle that much. And it's too much. It really is too much. Yeah. So it has its benefits, but it's also overwhelming.
It is, and it would be nice if at a minimum we could at least get back to sort of some sense of a non-biased news reader or something like that, so that
would be nice.
I do remember that growing up, and before I was interested in following the news in any way, shape, or form, I do remember I grew up in North Carolina, and before Jesse Helms, senator from years ago, became a very powerful senator, he was reading editorials on the local news channel. And that later that day, or right after he got finished, someone else would give the opposing point of view, and they would both get airtime either in the same week or on the same broadcast. As a matter of design, we are not going to have this guy saying this stuff without somebody else saying essentially the opposite, and then you get to weigh them and decide how you want to absorb that information. And that's just not present anymore. You have to literally flip channels now if you want to see opposing viewpoints, and people don't do that. So,
I agree.
Anyway, two very, very interesting topics, very interesting things that your doctoral degree has led you to examine. What are some things that you're working on now? I know you have some things coming up that are a little hush-hush, so I won't ask you to divulge too much there, but tell everybody kind of what you're doing now, and maybe what you foresee in the future coming up.
Well, what I've realized is like, whatever I experience, either personally or professionally, that leads to the book, right? So like Face Hooked was just me being inundated by client stories of, all the distress that they're experiencing because of social media. That was early on. Yeah. Untamed was about my personal pain and personal struggle, and a notion of resiliency through the work. So the work actually helped me heal. Right. What's really prevalent nowadays is narcissism, right? It's that word is so used, like more than we've ever, more than it's ever been used. And there are reasons. I'm not going to go into that, right? But so I decided I'm going to try to write a different take on a psychological book about narcissism. And I'm still providing the structure. I'm still creating it. And so I thought it would be interesting to write it from the perspective of a narcissist, based on, I used to work at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or trained there rather. And I've gathered some experience, from there, and through some other clients or so. And I think it would just be interesting to for readers to kind of hear it from the mouth of narcissists.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I'm still playing with it, but that's kind of what I'm doing now.
And see, I think that's the fun thing, is that you get to play with these different ideas and different thoughts and turn them into things. And I think you're in so much of a better position to do that having the first name doctor than you would be otherwise, both because of the training, but also just because of the halo effect and the fact that
absolutely, the title doctor has afforded me many opportunities that I don't believe I would have had it otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I hear it all the time from people, and I just want to, if anyone's out there struggling to get through the dissertation, being able to have conversations like this is the reason why you want to finish, because you can be doing all of these sorts of things. But like you said, that opens so many doors, and you just get to choose which ones to walk through. Very cool. Well, listen, if Dr. Flores, if someone wanted to reach out to you to continue any of these conversations we've been having here today, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can go through my website. So it's DrSuzanaFlores.com. So it's DrSuzana, just one N, FLORES.com. And so I read my messages through there.
Okay. And we'll, if you happen to miss that, you can go to dissertationdone.com/blog to find Dr. Flores' episode there, and we'll have her contact information there for you to collect at your leisure. So Dr. Flores, again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated having you today.
No, this was great. Thank you for having me.
Very cool. I'll just remind folks briefly that today's episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done. So if you might need help with your dissertation project, maybe a little coaching, guidance, support, direction, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. And if you would like to write a book to help establish your expertise, let's have a conversation about that. You can go to dissertationdone.com/book, and we'll set up some time to talk. Dr. Flores, again, thank you so much. This whole thing, Marvel, the Facebook, very cool, very cool. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
All right. To everyone else, I want you to have a wonderful day and go out there and live your unconventional life.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.